I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today's program, Monday, the 20th, I believe, is one in a series that we'll be doing focusing on politics, civic engagement. We're moving to a critical place nationally, and that place has always been critical locally. Today's program features two of the shining lights, two phenomenal stories of leadership, of political engagement, of political courage, and of victory here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I'll talk about more of that in a minute. But before I do, I want to invite those of you who are joining us from any of the social media platforms. We are streaming live on YouTube on two platforms. One is the Black Press USA, which hosts the program, and also the YouTube Inside News MN channel. We also stream on Twitter. We stream on Facebook on three different platforms and on LinkedIn. Wherever you're connecting, we appreciate, we value the connection. We are asking you to help us grow subscribers, and we're trying to monetize our YouTube Insight News MN channel in particular. So what do? Today, tomorrow, anytime you can think of it, go to the YouTube Insight News MN channel, become a subscriber, cost you nothing, get you notified when we go live, every time we go live, and share and like. We've crossed the 500 subscriber threshold. We're aiming for 1,000, and you're taking action today and telling your friends and your neighbors to check us out, moves us in that direction. With that, let me bring my two guests in today. This is going to be, as I've always promised, a robust conversation. My guests are Robin Wonsley. She's the first Black independent socialist city council member in Minneapolis. And Robin is serving Ward 2. She's a renter, she says. She's a labor organizer, a former University of Minnesota graduate student. Also in this program, another trailblazer, Rosalyn Harmon. And Roslyn was elected last week to become the mayor of Golden Valley. And to many, that seems improbable. We're going to find out how it happened, why it happened. Both these elections, in common parlance, I guess, or what do they call it? Traditional thinking, are improbable. But these women and their teams, their collaborators, supporters, have made the impossible possible, and they're setting the standard, a new charting a new path for our community, and I think for the world, by their leadership, their vision, and their service. Well, Roslyn and Robin, good afternoon, and welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here.
Well, I go back with both of you guys for a long time, and so I'm smiling extra because I know you, and I've respected you and the relationships we've had over years, and so pleased to be witness to your continued development and evolution into the leadership roles that you play. Let me ask you both to sort of introduce yourselves as you would to somebody new, to get a sense of what you do and why you do. I'll start with you, Madam Mayor-elect Robin. Rosalyn Harmon.
Roslyn, right? Yeah. Tongue-tied. Oh, wow. So I am actually a 30-year resident here in Golden Valley. Moved here going into my senior year of high school. And, it's great. Just being a resident where I call the heart of the city. It's just connected to 169, Highway 55, 100, 94. It's literally, not even 7 minutes from downtown Minneapolis. So it's truly the heart. But currently, I'm the executive director of Dispute Resolution Center, where we do restorative practices and mediation services for the city of St. Paul in the areas of criminal justice, restorative justice, harassment, housing and conciliation courts, as well as civil and family disputes. And so running for mayor, I didn't see it coming, but I have to say it was Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison who foresaw this, and he doesn't even recall even saying it, but he's the keynote speaker for the Mabel Gala. Mabel is the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers Gala that they have every year. And this was the same evening that Jamar Clark had passed away. And Keith Ellison was on stage, and he was really talking about local people running for public office and how important it is that you don't have to be a politician to make an impact. And from the stage twice, he looked at me and said, Roslyn, if you ran for mayor, you would have my vote. And you know my mother, Mr. McFarlane, and as well as Ben Omarubi and others who have really been a part of my bonus father, the late William McGee, who was also Keith Ellison's mentor. They're looking at me like, what is he talking about? And I'm like, I do not know, because I am not a politician. But it's so interesting that long ago that he planted the seed. And when he was up for re-election last year, I said to him, as I was thinking about this, I was like, do you remember saying that on stage? And he was like, no.
Yeah.
So I'm as I put together a collage of just my process throughout this time, I'm hoping that Mabel will be able to find that footage, because it's truly powerful. And it was just the signs that kept calling me, because I said no to this a couple of times, but it was the signs throughout the years that just kept following, where it was like, you know what, I have to be obedient, and here we are.
Put you mentioned the death of I just am blanking now, but you mentioned Jamar Clark. Put that in context. What was the event there, and why it's so important is what's happened since that time.
Oh, geez. So yeah, right after that gala, he was right there on Penn and Plymouth.
On Plymouth Avenue, just before Penn.
Yes. And it was interesting because I was driving home and my aunt called me, just hysterical, because she was right there across the street at the Elks. And she witnessed it go down. And I'm just like, wait, what? And so
people understand, Jamar Clark was in a domestic situation with his significant other, and an ambulance had been called to give service to her. And the story, as I recall it, is that he was distraught and wanted to be with her, to be comforting. I'm not sure what it was that had put her in a distress mode. Maybe Robin, you do, I can't remember. But at the end of the day, the police who came viewed him as aggressive towards them, and a scuffle ensued. He ended up getting shot in the head, killed. The officer said that he was reaching for their gun, and that was their excuse for lethal force in his death. And that was a foreshadowing of what happened after that. Was with the I think the sequence is right. Jamar Clark first, then the suburban death of
Philando Castile.
And then fast forward, other things happen, but then George Floyd. So this is something that is kind of in the air we're breathing, and that was the environment out of which the voice came to you, the calling came to you, that you should think about becoming the mayor of Golden Valley. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Let me switch to Robin. And Robin, again, take a minute just to establish your calling and your identity as a person seeking and succeeding in providing service to our community, and I think to humanity. You and I go back to where we both participated in a exercise program for 10 weeks, and it was a wonderful time. So good to see you again, and congratulations. Let me say too that, when I first heard you announcing, I thought it was improbable. I really, me personally, confessing, said, oh, really? That's great. and I simply did not read the tea leaves. So I'm so glad that I got a chance to wake up.
I serve a faithful God, so he makes the impossible possible all the time. But in terms of who I am, I'm Robin Wonsley. I'm going into my second term of representing Ward 2 on the Minneapolis City Council, and also going into another term of serving as the city's first and so far only independent Democratic Socialist city council member. So meaning I ran as an independent, didn't run as a Democrat. Also definitely did not run as a Republican because I recognize, especially for Black folks who are often and have often been the leading champions of democracy in our society and have been the moral compass for our society here, especially in the US and the world. We haven't allowed the independence of our collective power be reflected in our political systems, and often felt we have to attach ourselves to political interests that's not always advocating for our best interests, and to be able to show that we can absolutely run independently, represent ourselves independently as we always have had to do, and to be able to bring that type of representations into powerful positions like local government, national government, all levels of government. And for me, my calling really started as growing up on the South Side of Chicago. So I'm not a native to Minneapolis, but growing up and really seeing my family, seeing myself have no choice but to advocate for their interests, especially when political figures, especially elected officials, seem to make decisions that, again, undermine their ability to have healthy, thriving, and productive lives. And that looked like closing down predominantly Black high schools or schools, public schools, specifically in the South Side region, which for most people who aren't aware about the geographic makeup of Chicago, South Side is where predominantly Black residents and of low income or working class status were concentrated in Chicago. So huge racial segregation, lines of segregation dominates Chicago. In addition to seeing public schools be closed, also seeing public housing be widely decimated, leaving thousands of residents, Black residents, with lack of housing choices, because again, you're relegated to the South Side, and the idea of choice for those residents meant going either to the South Side or coming to places like Minneapolis or other places across the country. That means relegating low-wage jobs to the South Side of Chicago, eliminating public infrastructures like parks and things of that nature. So growing up in that environment and seeing, why is this only particular to this region? And then I'll travel downtown that's predominantly white, downtown Chicago, looks like something out of a Jetsons, episode. It's nice, it's clean, it's shiny, everyone's happy. Seems like they got all the things that they need. And being like, that doesn't reconcile. Like something doesn't, why do they have all the nice things and we don't? So for me and for my family, operating under those conditions mean you had to advocate for yourself. And I've grown up also as a millennial, where we've had a number of social movements come forward to advocate for the collective interests of Black people and responding to those conditions around public education. I would say similar to Mayor-elect Harmon. For me, it's been public safety, and specifically the repeated killings of Black folks by police in our country. So for me, the movement was Black Lives Matter in responding to Trayvon Martin being killed by a vigilante, white supremacist vigilante. And then, of course, just go down the line, Mike Brown. And I mean, we only spoke about 3 names in Minneapolis or Minnesota, but there's been dozens who have not received justice traditionally. So for me, I also got my gateway into politics here in Minneapolis during the Justice for Jamar organizing in the wake of him being killed by Minneapolis police. That was a really major moment in the Black Lives Matter movement in Minneapolis, and really taking on the system of policing and over policing in our communities that leads to the loss of Black lives in our communities. And also, while I was active in those struggles, I became involved in workers' rights struggles, because as we know, predominantly Black communities are not only over-policed, but they're underserved and under-resourced. And again, that looks like having quality livable wage jobs. So I became active in the Fight for 15 campaign simultaneously while organizing with our Black Lives Matter residents.
You got muted. Unmute.
Oh,
there you go. Yeah.
But basically got involved in the Fight for 15 while advocating with our Black Lives Matter against police violence. Those efforts eventually led to Minneapolis passing a $15 minimum wage. Mm-hmm. Subsequently, St. Paul followed, and making St. Paul and Minneapolis be the first Midwestern cities to actually take on poverty wages. And from there, I've stayed with workers' rights and Black Lives Matter struggles around policing, around labor rights. And for me, my calling became solidified when George Floyd was murdered in May 2020, of now being part of our political advocacy network in Minneapolis and seeing politicians literally turn an eye to what is now known and officially documented per the Minnesota Department of Human Rights investigative report, turning an eye away from a violent racist police department that wreaked a lot of hell on predominantly Black, brown, and indigenous communities in our city. And without any recourse, without any systems of accountability in place, and without investing in the things that actually keeps our community safe. Being tired of that type of complacent leadership, it felt very clear that we were in a moment of transformative change. We needed leaders coming into our political systems that were going to work with our communities to advocate for that transformative change unapologetically and consistently. And that's what I've had the opportunity and privilege to do for the past 2 years, and what I'm absolutely excited to continue building on, and hopefully uplifting the conditions that our Black and brown and working class people have to live under in Minneapolis. I'm really excited to continue uplifting those conditions going into this next term.
Let me ask you both to reflect on the sea change in the political landscape that you are a part of, particularly the number of people of color, Blacks and other people of color, who are in the legislature. Brand new. For the longest time, we reported about Keith being in the House of Representatives, about Jeff and Bobby Joe moving to the Senate, being the dynamic duo, the two Black people in the Minnesota Senate. And now we've got a number of Black and brown people in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. And now we have Bobby Joe Champion as the president of the Minnesota Senate. Significant. In addition, along with you, Roslyn, we've elected a new mayor, Nadia Muhammad, to a sister suburban community, St. Louis Park. Talk about that if you would. But also we have 2 Black mayors in the Brooklyns, Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park. We have had other mayors, I think, and maybe Eden Prairie, I'm not sure. But a lot has happened. And what does that reflect? Is it demographics driven? Is it ideology driven? Is it awareness driven? Or a combination of all? Roslyn, you first.
It's interesting that you say that, because Golden Valley, we're 80% white and 20% people of color. And when I met with Nadia to hear that she was running for St. Louis Park, and she told me she didn't have any contenders at the time. And I was like, 0? And she was like, no. So it was really like the last day of filing, someone stepped up to run. But it's incredible, because I think right now people want change, but people also want compassion, humanity, and transparency. And I believe that she and I both have that. I think for the city of Golden Valley, this is huge, because I won by 26 votes. So it was so close. And so that just really comes to show how every vote matters up until the very end. I just remember the night before, I was going to the Holiday gas station, and this young brother was like, "How's your day going?" And I'm like, brother, I'm tired. And he was like, oh, a hard day at work. And I said, I've been canvassing. I'm running for mayor. He was like, oh, you're in my apartment. And I'm like, where do you live? He was like, hello, apartments. And I'm like, well, you got to vote. And he was like, well, I am now. And I'm like, no, brother, I'm serious. You have to vote. And so he was probably one of those 26 because it was literally the day before. So he and his girlfriend. So it's incredible because I think, and not to change the subject, but as Robin was talking about just being an independent, for me, I have to keep it real. I have always identified as a Democrat, but our local DFL did not support my run at all. And it was very ugly, and they could have supported all candidates, but it was very clear who they wanted to support. But it was very unfortunate and very, for me, disappointing because we were all great candidates. And so I really had to run almost like an independent. I had to do it by myself. I had the support and endorsements that a lot of platforms, they were like, you have the most endorsements that we've seen, right? And they were all DFL. And so the fact that they didn't give us all the letter of support, it just really shows that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, especially when we're talking about equity and inclusion and trying to be fair on behalf of those running, especially people of color. So for me, I have to speak up about that.
Mhm.
I have to speak up about that. And I know for Nadia, there's been, we were on a platform, and Robin, you were there, where we were able to really speak about the truths of being women of color in predominantly white spaces running. And what does that look like in terms of the challenges and the obstacles and the games, right? That political agendas will put forth. But I think with all of us right now, we're saying it's our time. But not only is it our time, but we really want to create a new vision and a new model of how the political agenda can be without all of that other icky stuff. And so I believe that we're the change for that. To say, hey, let's do this where it's equitable, it's fair, and where we're doing this with some integrity and professionalism.
For context, this is before you maybe were born, Roslyn, certainly before you came to Minnesota. Golden Valley had a very nasty reputation for Black people. Police in Golden Valley were known to stop and harass Black motorists. And everybody in the Black neighborhood knew that if you're driving over 55, the minute you hit the city line, and I mean, in a casual conversation, someone would say, we're in Golden Valley now, you got to be careful. And so to have that kind of need to speak to the threat of harassment amounts to terror in a certain kind of way, a formal, official suppression that our people experience. And that also, I think, applied to the experiences of our community in Brooklyn Center and in Brooklyn Park and in the Roseville or the place where Philando was killed north of St. Paul. And so there's been this old guard mentality that even though it's not spoken, we know that our mission is suppression, is to preserve the right to the benefits of what we call democracy to our people, and to view you people, meaning me and you, as the barbarians at the gate, right? And their job, unspoken, unwritten, maybe spoken between them, but not to us, is keeping us out. But the impact we see, it's been clear and it's been historic, where the suppression of opportunity and the attempt to deny our rights and our opportunity and our health and well-being. Witness all the disparities we here in Minnesota experience. Robin, what do you think? Same question. The landscape, how's it changed as you see it? And we'll talk more about what it's going to be in the future and what it means.
Yeah. So, there's no question that it matters to have representation, especially amongst Black folks, working class Black folks in these positions where major decisions that shape our everyday lives are made, places like city halls in your respective city. But what I will name, though, is Minneapolis is a great example. And I would say my particular term, my first term, is a really good example of the limitations of just identity politics or representation. When I came into my term, it was one of the most diverse city councils in the history of the city of Minneapolis. We had over, I believe, 7 out of the 13 seats that were represented by, a person of diverse backgrounds, racially, ethnically, faith-wise, sexuality and gender. And also, I will have to say this past term has shown how systems of power can very much leverage your kinfolks to advance their interests. Things or critical issues that we know are most important to our communities. Many of my colleagues who looked similar to like me or were of the same diverse backgrounds voted in the opposite position. One of the clearest examples of this was something called the East Phillips Indoor Farm, which is basically a 10-year struggle led by Indigenous, Black, Brown residents in East Phillips, which is one of the most diverse neighborhoods, not only in Minneapolis, but in the state of Minnesota, and one of the most polluted communities in the state of Minnesota. And there have been this project that the city was trying to ram through for years called a water yard facility that would essentially exacerbate pollution within this already heavily polluted, predominantly Black and Brown Indigenous community. And the community said, no, you've created policies, all these things that says that racially there's been a target on our backs to surround us with nothing but industrial polluters, to allow, roadways through our communities, to increase traffic and carbon emissions. And all of these impacts is leading to our children dying early, to our residents experiencing respiratory illnesses early, all sorts of negative health impacts, many of which we see also in North Minneapolis that's heavily polluted. And they said no more. If you have a project that you're trying to bring forward into our community, we should be the face of designing what that is. And it should be really tailored towards doing reparative, environmental, and anti-racist work in our communities. You owe us that much. And the city fought them tooth and nail for 10 years. And that project was led by a prior council member of the city's project, who was a Latina woman. And then many of my colleagues throughout our 2 years continued to support a project that they knew was going to harm Black and Brown and Indigenous residents. And if it wasn't for the collective power of that community leveraging pressure at the state level, where we have not only diverse representation, but diverse political representation. We have great progressives who's working alongside socialists to do transformative things like free college, all sorts of things that we also were told impossible at some point. And they are the ones who helped make the community-led vision for East Phillips Farm possible. And this is a national major thing for the Indigenous Land Back movement, for addressing environmental harms and our climate crisis and how it has racialized impacts for certain communities. But that was something that you would think, and I want to name, people could go and watch the city council meetings. We had Indigenous people crying, raising pictures of lost loved ones to illnesses, and to our colleagues who literally said, why are you trying to poison me? And we're the same color, or this as a Black person, this as an East African person. And to see those colleagues still vote to essentially poison them shows a lot about how our own folks, our kinfolks, can be used as tools to advance political agendas that actually hurt our people. So I also want to name Minneapolis is also a great case study for showing the limitations of representation, especially if that representation isn't guided by political initiatives that are going to be beholden and held account to the communities that they represent.
So on that project, the East Phillips Farm project, that has had success of late. Give the quick update on where that stands now.
Yes, so really excited. As I mentioned, part of the victory on this was that we had great champions at the state who recognized we have to do better. Minneapolis is tripping, but we're not going to trip with them, and pull together a really great agreement where East Phillips Neighborhood Institute, which is the basically the organization that was facilitating a lot of the struggle for the community-led vision, they were expected to raise a certain percentage of money to show that they can purchase the site, they can be part of the development process. And once they raised that certain percentage, the state would kick in additional dollars, and then the city would relinquish the development rights to the group. So the community raised the money in spite of a lot of traps that were set, lots of skepticisms. They were able to do that independently. And now this unlocks doors or unlock funding at the state level for them to actually develop the site into that community-led vision, and they have the development rights to do so. So again, this is significant. It's being praised across the country, especially in our indigenous rights circles who are justifiably advocating for land back so that they can do the healing work that they need to do and that the nation of the U.S. has deprived them of doing for centuries now. This is such a meaningful win. And it's a meaningful win for a multiracial coalition. I name Indigenous, but East Phillips has a expansive East African community that are also part of the table, and they'll be having a lot of their community needs represented in this vision, along with we have a growing Latino community there. Like, it's so exciting to see community have ownership over an actual asset that they're going to be able to shape from start to finish for priorities that have not been met by the city in many ways. So this is such a significant victory, and I'm so thankful for the very few colleagues on the city council side who held the line and said that we cannot poison our residents. Even for those of us who did not represent the ward, we knew we cannot allow our neighbors and constituents to be polluted and poisoned. And I'm really thankful for our Minneapolis delegation leaders who also took the initiative to get all of us at a place where we could acknowledge the community-led vision and actually actualize it. So
shout out, if you would, the council members that supported, that acted right. I'm not asking you to put on blast or throw shade to anybody else, but I would say give some sunshine to the ones that were on the right side of history.
Yes. Councilmember Chavez, who came in as the Ward 9, this project happened in Ward 9. That's where East Phillips is located. As a new council member, his community was looking to him to lead on this and get it across the finish line after being deprived of that from their former predecessor. And I'm so proud of my fellow colleague, fellow socialist council member, Jason Chavez, for doing exactly that and showing up for his residents. Same with Ward 10 council member, also fellow socialist, council member Aisha Chugtai, held the line. North Side, Jeremiah Ellison, council member Jeremiah Ellison, also someone that showed he was not always in favor of the project, eventually transitioned over after meeting with the community and seeing what the community was advocating for, changed his position. Ward 1 council member Elliot Payne held the line, stood for community the entire time. Also, council member Jamal Osmond, again, another council member who had prior was not in support of the project, but continued to engage the residents and be engaged by the residents to the point where he eventually switched his position and decided to be on the right side. So I'm so thankful of those colleagues. And then there's too many to name on the state side, but I have to give a special shout out to another first term state rep, Samantha Sensor Mura, who represents our district. She was the leading force alongside Representative Aisha Gomez to really get the state bought in. Also, Northside Representative Fuli, like our Minneapolis delegation showed up and showed out to make this project happen too.
What's exciting to me is this Twin Cities delegation in the state legislature. I've interviewed several of the fairly newly elected leaders, and what they are saying without apology is that we want to move the money. We're moving the money from where it used to go without question to where it needs to go, because we know that our communities have been, kicked to the curb. We've been an afterthought, and the state's business has been the business as usual that kept us, as usual, in a position of powerlessness and lack of access to the tools, the resources, and the solutions that ultimately come from us. So I think this team that we have at the legislature is reflecting a learning and a confidence of how to use the power of the legislature and the power of the budget to redirect the money into innovation and into solutions that originate from within our lived experiences, that validate our right to be at the table and to be at our table to solve our problems, and to call on the public treasury to support us as we are the owners of the treasury as well. Sound right? Roslyn, so, talk about vision now, and I want you both to talk about housing in particular. One of the challenges, Robin, is housing crises, homelessness, and affordable housing. And from the other side, the philosophy that says if you build, for rich people, that poor people will eventually get a chance to live somewhere that the rich people move from, the trickle down. And then part of the strategies had been, as you said, in Chicago, where you simply move people around, and where they got moved to, in part, was Golden Valley and Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park. So what impact is that? How do we address the challenge of providing opportunity in housing where people are right now, not limiting their right to move if they choose to, but not forcing them to move, recognizing that they have a right to be and live and work and prosper where they are? Robin, what are you thinking? And Roslyn, what's the impact of communities like Golden Valley that, for all intents and purposes, are known as rich communities?
Well, Golden Valley has several pockets of rich communities. Our low income, it's very few. And there is one community, and I think that was also part of my 26 votes, because I went and hit that up, and I know that my opponent did not. And that's the Dover Hill community. And for Golden Valley, out of the 23,000 residents that we have, we only have 47 vouchers that we give for subsidized housing. So yeah. So we're working really hard to bring in affordable homes, but for us, what does that mean? So we have apartment buildings everywhere. We're about to put up a 300 unit off of 55 over by Wells Fargo there, where 40 units will be affordable. But affordable for Golden Valley is really based on that AMI, which is not what our communities would consider to be affordable. And so as we look at low income, we've had some low income housing, and we turned that around real quick, because our police were getting calls nearly daily. And so they gentrified that community right off of Douglas and raised the rent on those. And, so it's very interesting, because there is supposed to be some lower income in a very wealthy community in Golden Valley. And residents are very concerned about what that will look like by putting that in an area where the homes are almost close to the $1 million range. So, we're also talking about, when we put up our Habitat for Humanity homes, right? There's been a lot of concern about, well, why are we putting these homes by railroads or very busy areas? People, they should have equal rights, where they should be nestled in the community as well. So fighting on behalf of that. But what I will now have to advocate on behalf of are just tenant rights. We have a building here in Golden Valley that has been a project for the last 10 to 13 years. It's the biggest complex here in Golden Valley with 375 units. None are affordable, but it's not finished. And so for us, 100 of us are living on one side, but the other side is not done. We have no amenities, but yet our rent went up almost 8%. And I said, I am not going to pay that if we have no amenities, nothing. So then they lowered it to 5%. And I still said, I am not, right? And so it's these type of things where, you know, this building has been up for quite some time, and there's some serious issues going on, to include mold. And so when our city council approved this building, as well as 2 other luxury apartments here in Golden Valley, there were no conditions put in place. So now, because of, you know, this whole unit, you know, still bringing in people, but not on one side, but bringing in people to fulfill these 100 units on the other side, and not being transparent. For me now, living here and being a tenant, I have to advocate on behalf of these rights, because I'm dealing with this personally. So, you know, in Golden Valley, there's a lot of work that we have to do. We are dealing with fiscal disparities where we are considered a loser. And so that also makes it challenging for us to find, you know, space. But where our council really dropped the ball was right there where our old Optum Health facility used to be. And if you drive down Highway 55 in Douglas, it is just this huge, monstrous industrial building, which will be office space. But we have enough empty office spaces here in Golden Valley. And that should have been a complex of townhomes, one level senior, you know. And so, you know, our council took the very first offer that came to us, and we weren't progressive enough to go out to find developers to come and take on that space. That's just a huge space that would have been great for more restaurants, because as you know, Golden Valley, we really don't have a downtown. And so these are the things that we're dealing with. But by me being endorsed by the Minnesota area realtors, you know, we are really advocating on behalf of more affordable and attainable housing here in Golden Valley, and not so much apartments, because we have a lot of apartments. But when we say that we have so many affordable units within them, what does that really mean? And we really need to make sure that we are doing this fairly across the board, so all people of life stages, all people throughout life stages, regardless of their socioeconomics, can live here and sustain living here as well. So that's very important for me.
Robin, what are your thoughts? And when you also pivot to your work on public safety and police work and what the attitudes are. And Roslyn, you've got challenges in that area as well. So I want to wrap the conversation up talking about public safety, justice, and policing. Robin, go ahead.
Yeah. So yes, Minneapolis is absolutely dealing with a housing crisis that it has ignored for quite some time. One or a key priority that I'm super excited to advance in this next term is something that I call a blueprint to house Minneapolis, and it has a couple of pillars or components of that blueprint that I think is going to help us come up with some solutions to really dive into this crisis. One being, as Mayor-elect Harmon highlighted, we have to strengthen and expand renter protections. Minneapolis is over 50% renters, and there's a large percentage of those renters living in cost burden housing, meaning 30% of their income is going towards rents alone. So we understand that, you know, renting in Minneapolis is becoming more and more costly, and that's leading to displacement. So we have to really address renter protections that's going to address that costliness and also keep people housed, especially in our rental units. There's two key policies that I know this progressive council or majority new council is going to have to take on next year, one of which is around rent control. Because as Mayor Harmon highlighted, we know, especially when it comes to Black and Brown and indigenous residents, or in some of our more underfunded communities, that's where we're seeing newer developments, and even existing landlords, fine, your slum landlords, do arbitrary increases on rents that also leads to people being priced out of their neighborhoods and their communities. So I've been a lone champion for 3%, no vacancy decontrol, or price gouging, no price gouging, and no weakened form of rent control. We really need to be looking at how we're capping rent increases. Second is, right now, again, under one of our policies called 2040, that is currently on pause legally, we authorize thousands of units to be built of rental housing. And what we're now seeing is at minimum 5,000 of those units are not activated. Developers or property owners are sitting on vacant units that we know needs to be activated in order to house people who are facing housing insecurity. So one policy that I just even noticed yesterday is to increase vacancy fees on unoccupied units for rental properties, but also commercial spaces, because we see that a lot. Even in my ward, we know this places like North Minneapolis, where we have tons of commercial spaces that's just been sitting empty for years. And we know many of those owners are absentee. They're just waiting to sell those properties and land to the highest bidder. And, you know, the development that they might concede to might not actually align with the needs of the communities that, you know, they're looking to sell or bring into those communities. So those are two key policies. Another pillar is investing in public housing. Right now, our public housing authority has a 7,000 person wait list. It's one of the most affordable housing. When Mayor-elect Harmon mentioned that average medium income, or AMI, right now it's very clear we need 30% AMI. Basing people's average incomes on the metro suburbs gives a false sense of how much people actually have in their pockets to then pay for things like rent. 30% means we're looking at the 40,000 annual folks, or below that, people who don't have extra discretionary income to just pay their landlord all their full check. So we absolutely need to be protecting and expanding our public housing portfolio. That's something that I was really excited to work on my first term, especially with state leaders like Representative Esther Abaje, and also the Board of Estimates and Taxation President Samantha Priest-Stinson. Through collaborating with them, we were able to increase public housing funding in Minneapolis alone from $1 million each year to 10. So that shows what we're able to do. Actually have political leaders willing to invest. Another piece is going to be regulating these developers. Similar to what Mayor-elect Harmon mentioned, developers have been allowed to have free reign in our communities, build up luxury housing, charge all sorts of things, do predatory practices against their tenants and residents, and they're not held accountable. So we absolutely need to pass stronger regulations on developers. I know there's lots of statewide conversations around how do we regulate out-of-state developers that are purchasing up large portfolios of housing, especially in North Minneapolis, where in Ward 4 alone, I believe over 60% of their housing is owned by one or maybe two out-of-state real estate interests. That's also expanding in the metro suburbs. We need to curve that all the way. And then lastly, we absolutely have to show up better for our unhoused neighbors, and have to develop a humane encampment response. But that's also going to be paired with making significant investments into emergency and permanent housing. So we're getting people into stable housing while they're going through recovery, while they're trying to, get back on their feet with a new job. You can't do any of those things if you don't know where you're sleeping night to night. So we absolutely have to do better and create some more policies and funding to make sure that we're allowing more permanent and immediate housing structures to come into play when we're dealing with our unsheltered residents. So those are kind of the key components that my office is going to be leading on and advocating on as we're trying to lead this blueprint for making sure everyone has housing in Minneapolis, regardless of your economic background or where you live. Where you live should not dictate the quality of housing that you get to have access to. So those are kind of the key things that I'm going to be working on in the next term.
pivot to the police question. You, as a progressive, have been at the forefront of helping and asking our society and our city to reimagine health, reimagine policing or justice or the legal system. Talk about that, and where do we stand with that as you see it right now? It's a major debate, and it's not over yet.
It is not over. Basically, the position for me, or what I've been a staunch supporter of, is public safety that goes beyond policing. We know public safety, when you're talking about doing it effectively, cannot start or end with an armed officer coming up or showing up. There's a multitude of ways we can be investing in other modes of public safety services that are actually responsive to the needs of our residents. So we've had, for my first term, a long debate around what does it look like to actually build infrastructure that supports that direction. Has it been easy conversations? Absolutely not. But some of the fruits of those hard conversations and a lot of organizing that our residents have led, some of the fruits have produced something or a new Office of Community Safety at the city, where we have created a new office that has fire, the police, neighborhood safety, that's leading our unarmed safety services, and a few other public safety departments as well. The goal is, again, to expand the number of unarmed public safety services, like our behavior crisis response team, which is our mental health 911's dispatch program, where if you're having a mental health crisis, you call 911. A trained mental health practitioner will respond, not alongside a police officer, not with the officer, but just an actual trained practitioner in that field. We want to grow that for a number of other, type of crisis response, like domestic violence. We know that's another problem, another crisis that our current law enforcement are not meaningfully addressing. We should be looking at how do we bring trained experts in that field into our 911 and public safety system. Same with diversionary programs for our young people. There's a major concern across the city right now of how are we being responsive to young people getting involved in a number of type of crimes, especially auto thefts, and locking them up simply cannot be the answer. So we are really excited to be investing in what we call a continuum of service, of how are we advancing restorative services, preventative, proactive, and responsive. So some of the things that I named, they could fit in that bucket. And as someone who has the 3rd precinct or / community safety center coming into my ward this next year, we're now going to have a facility space to also say, how are we aligning our buildings, our facilities towards this new model, where it's not just police occupying your communities. You actually have a robust network of trained experts who can respond to your diverse needs at a moment of crisis. So that is what I think my office and many of my colleagues are advocating for when we're talking about transforming public safety, of expanded options for our residents that go beyond a law enforcer showing up. Especially as Minneapolis right now, our police department is under 2 consent decrees. There already have been found in violation of the 1 consent decree. There's a lot of work that they're going to have to do in the coming years to get their stuff together. But what we have seen such great promise and results in is that comprehensive, non-armed public safety services. They are also helping to keep crime at historic levels, low levels in our community right now. So I'm super, super excited to continue leading on that work.
Well, they've got a massive hiring initiative that they're doing now with the Minneapolis Police Department. What do you see as a benefit for that, if you see it as a benefit?
So today, actually, in a couple hours, I get to take a vote on this where, because of a charter amendment, which the charter in Minneapolis is our constitution, the Police Federation back in the 80s, I believe, was able to get something in called a staffing minimum that most places around the country, they don't have this. We don't have staffing minimums for nurses, for any other workforce, but we have this for the police. In light of the changing landscape of policing right now, we are not meeting that staffing figure of 731. And that's creating problems. The city is trying to exhaust funding mechanisms to attract new officers. But what is being ignored in that conversation is new officers do not want to come, or good officers do not want to come to Minneapolis just because they're not getting paid enough. They don't want to come to Minneapolis because every other day, our police department is in the news for doing racist, violent activities, for not honoring the consent decrees, for promoting, even right now, officers who have been documented in engaging in racist activities. They do not want to work alongside Derek Chauvins. That is not what they want to do.
Great.
So we keep trying to throw money at a problem that we're really not digging deep into. And also, again, if the staffing minimum is a barrier, which it is, because I want to name on the fiscal aspect, we have 500 or so officers right now. The minimum is 731. That means we're legally mandated to fund 731 officers that we are not filling those spots. That's tens of millions of dollars that's being locked into ghost positions every year that could be going to other initiatives like we just talked about around housing, around public housing, around in expanded public. We already have research at the city that shows, and the results are showing where we're at. We're achieving historic low levels of crime with our current staffing model. We need to be talking about how we're elevating other public safety personnel alongside that to continue on these effective results. And that means revisiting the staffing minimum.
Roslyn, I've got about 2 minutes left. What's the Golden Valley iteration of this? Your city recently lost, I think,
28.
28 officers walked off the job, retired, left. So what does that do for Golden Valley, and why?
So I'm so excited about this conversation. I get so excited because this is my jam, right? So my full-time job, I do restorative work and for the city of St. Paul. And so I applaud Mayor Carter because he constantly gives me contracts, right, to really bring restorative work to the St. Paul Attorney's Office, where we do diversion work, as well as Ramsey County with John Choi's office for our juveniles. And so as we look at the city of Golden Valley, we lost 28 out of 35 officers last year. And we had a full-out investigation where we did find some racism within the department. But because of the process and the way that it was handled, a lot of our officers, they left. So we were down to 7, where we had to have Hennepin County come in and help, and they're still helping us. I am vice chair of our Peace Commission, which is Police Employment Accountability Community Engagement, where we work very closely with our department in the areas of data recruitment and community engagement. And I've been sitting in on interviews, and so we sworn in 3 officers a couple of weeks ago. So now we're at 19. So our goal is to get to 31 definitely by the summer of 2024. We have the most diverse police department that Golden Valley has ever had. Our police chief is African American. Our assistant chief is a Black woman from Minneapolis. And our new assistant chief of police is a Latino man from California. And we're 31% women on the force. So as we're looking at prosecution efforts now in the Golden Valley and diversion and what that looks like, just based on the model that I do at DRC, it's very important that we have alternative routes for our young people, as you said, with these car thefts and other low level misdemeanors. But not only that, yes, but changing neighborhood watch to neighborhood welcome. I want to train our block leaders in restorative work so that can be an intervention and prevention for the police to be called.
Madam Mayor-elect Rosalyn Harmon, thank you so much.
Yes.
Council Member Robin Wonsley, thank you so much. Continued success. I want you to come back often and keep the community updated. Thank you so much. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Take care.